So welcome today to our cost of living crisis, our finances and wellbeing virtual boardroom that's being facilitated by HR Recruit and Marion Hewitt. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Marion, who will introduce herself shortly. Marion is going to look at the link between our finances and our health and what we can do as individuals, and also what support employers can provide. If you've got any questions during the session, then please feel free to put them into the chat box facility or shout them out. And if not, we will try and find time at the end to answer them. And now I'm going to hand you over to Marion, who will introduce herself and start the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Jo. My name's Marion. My route to here is a lot of years in HR, different sectors, types of roles over the years, and then gradually specialised and had more of an interest within the wellbeing sphere. And my particular area of focus and interest in terms of research is around self-compassion and self-kindness. And this session today is something that is really relevant in terms of what is the area that we need to look at in terms of well-being. And as with all the boardroom sessions, it's not just about me sharing ideas and thoughts, it's also about drawing on your own expertise and things that you're doing. So please feel free to use the chat. We will give an opportunity for you to have conversations at the end, and I hope you will stay for that part as well. But if we just start by going through thinking a bit more about how all these things are linked, our finances and our well-being. And everywhere we turn at the moment, we're hearing about the cost of living crisis, the challenge of pay falling behind in inflation. Just in the last week, or probably just over a week now, we had inflation going up again unexpectedly. We then had interest rates going up as well, which impacts mortgage rates, which means that everybody, I don't think there's anybody that's going to be immune to it. And it's having a real impact on wider well-being, which we all experience in different ways. And in this session, I'd like us to take the opportunity to think about the link between our finances and our health. So how our health impacts our finances and how our financial health impacts our overall well-being. Then to think about where we are now and what support we can provide as employers. So a couple of definitions of what we actually mean by financial wellbeing. So drawing on CIPD, Money and Pensions Advice Service. So it's employees' ability to make the most of their money and finances on a day-to-day basis, whilst also being able to deal with the unexpected and being able to plan and save for the future. And the second one, feeling secure and in control alongside being financially resilient, confident and empowered. And that is where people are finding increasing challenges. Actually, it's about having the reserves to deal with the unexpected. It's about having the capacity to save for the future, where an increasing proportion of the population are struggling to meet the day-to-day needs. But we also shouldn't forget, actually, a lot of this is not new to an awful lot of people. It's just having wider focus because more and more people are being impacted, and recognising it's also not just about people on low incomes, because people, set their life, arrange things according to their means. So high mortgages, high loans, rates go up. So, people are being affected regardless of income within reason. So let's think about breaking this down a bit as to how, which links to which and how the interconnection is. So if we are worried about our finances, it will affect our mental well-being. And if we are finding it hard to meet the needs to keep us well, it will affect both our physical and our mental health. World Health Organization talks about health as being a totality of physical, social and mental well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So we have to have multiple elements in place to have overall health. And if we have poor mental health or are physically ill, it can have an impact on our ability or motivation to manage our finances and our ability to earn, our ability to progress. So you can see how it is interconnected. looking at some of the data around finances and mental health, the last ONS figures that came out in February, we're finding that over 1.5 million people are experiencing problem debt and related poor mental health. So problem debt is about debt where people can't service it. It's not about, you know, ongoing agreed sort of mortgages, and it's when it becomes out of control, or you get caught into a cycle of interest rates and just paying off that. We saw a fifth, or they found a fifth of adults are borrowing more than they were a year ago, and the expectation of saving has reduced by 42%. To people saying, then 42% of people saying they are not going to be able to save anything in the next year. So obviously that links back to the definition about not having the resilience to cope with unexpected costs, and all the figures are increases on the previous year. We also know that vulnerable groups are more likely to borrow more and to use more credit. And when credit scores become an issue, then they only have access to higher interest rates, which again creates that vicious cycle of being caught up with paying interest and never being able to get ahead. And people in that group are parents of dependent children, people in deprived areas of Great Britain, and people that are rent rather than homeowners in terms of where the ONS looked at things. Purchasing power has reduced as costs have risen. We see that in pretty much everything. We are trying to buy things that have been sort of fairly stable, certainly the food shopping, for a long time. We kind of haven't really we've got used to those prices not really increasing, and we've seen a huge increase in that in the last year. And then how that links back to our well-being. We're seeing that those in arrears in payments experience or report lower levels of happiness, life satisfaction, and higher levels of anxiety, all of which I guess it is perfectly logical. 6% of adults reported being behind on utility bills, and 47% finding it hard to pay. And the CAB say that over a fifth of the issues that they are dealing with are now related to worries and inability to pay fuel bills. So linking it to our well-being, the financial worry triggers the same stress response as physical danger. It will trigger that raised blood pressure, increased heart rate, adrenaline, cortisol, all the things that our body is doing to process and manage what it sees as a threat. And say if the brain doesn't differentiate between types of threat and the threat response. And we know prolonged stress is linked to anxiety and depression. Given what we also know, that people that are concerned about finances, there are links to self-esteem and confidence and self-worth, all of which are part of our psychological well-being. So they're being negatively impacted, our overall mental health is impacted. And the stigma around, not keeping up, the pressure from the media, the images that we see everywhere create stresses. Perhaps thinking about not being able to do the things that we want to do that support our psychological well-being, not being able to afford to go out with friends, not being able to afford gym membership, those sorts of things. And half of adults reported being behind on energy bills. And they also reported high levels of anxiety compared to only a third of people that were not behind. So we're seeing lots of links between worrying about money and how it impacts our physical and our mental health. And then if we think about more specifically financial situations and physical health, it can impact people's ability to afford the things we need to keep well, a healthy diet. Sadly, it is probably much easier to buy an unhealthy diet than to develop a really healthy diet. Yes, if people have got a good level of knowledge of nutrition and cooking ability, yes, people can be creative and there are ways. But generally, it is much easier to buy cheaper, unhealthy food. So maybe, when we're looking later about things that we could do, the education piece is part of what we could do. Having the right clothes to fit the seasons, keeping warm, being able to take part in things that we want to do. Cost of heating has been a huge thing over this last winter, and if people are not able to keep warm, that is going to reduce their resistance to other illnesses. And then actually also things that we just take for granted, actually cost of water, you know, with meters, that again will impact people. And let's look at it the other way around. If somebody is already experiencing poor mental health, how does that affect their finances? And it may mean people will avoid addressing financial problems as part of the symptoms. If somebody is diagnosed with depression or anxiety, it could be too overwhelming. The worry could be too much, or the lack of motivation, they just can't be bothered as a symptom of the illness, means they may just avoid dealing and addressing with things. Or people may do things to actually make themselves feel better, you know, impulse buying to give themselves a boost when they can't afford it, or make bad financial decisions because they're not able to make the clear, rational, pragmatic decisions because they're not feeling in the best place. We also know that only 43% of people with mental illness are in work, compared to 74% of the wider population and 65% of those with physical illness. So that affects ability to earn the money they need to deal with financial issues. And people who have got a diagnosed mental illness are overrepresented in lower paid roles and part-time work. So again, their opportunities are reduced. 4 times as likely to be in arrears with utilities as those that don't have a diagnosed mental illness. So lots of data that just show how interconnected those things are in ways that we might not initially think about. So where are we now? We've had the pandemic, but whilst there may have been major stresses linked to that, money worries are not new to a significant proportion of the population. We now have the cost of living crisis. We've seen, mentioned right at the beginning, the inflation rate, the interest rate, mortgage rates, utilities, food, petrol, all these things that we have to buy are increasing dramatically. People have borrowed based on their means, having got used to low inflation, low interest rates, which means our ability to service all those loans becomes much reduced. So it's not just those on low incomes that are affected during this. And an outcome of all of that, a lot of people have got depleted resources, just, you know, weary of having to cope with so many things, and you know, people are having to borrow to meet everyday expenses, which creates even more of a stress. What does that mean to us as employers? So separate to the wanting to do the right thing, wanting to support staff, which I would like to sort of take as read, let's also look at the business case, because ultimately we will have to present the business case of it. So 1/4 of employees say that money worries are affecting their ability to do their job, which has risen to 1/3 through the cost of living crisis. And then quite a recent survey, YouGov with HR Ninjas found that 92% of HR professionals were feeling concern about employees' financial well-being. It has increased. So what can we do? What does this actually look like? We can't solve the bigger things. It's way out of our control. But we know within those figures that over 1/4, 28% of people already say money worries have impacted their work performance, most commonly through lost sleep, because they're worrying health problems such as stress and anxiety mean people find it hard to concentrate or make decisions at work. And 29% feel that it has impacted their productivity. So there's very real things that are happening in the workplace as an outcome of that. And sadly, only 5% of employees feel that employers have a comprehensive set of financial well-being strategies. And it's all actually the least, if we look at the CIPD domains of well-being, so all the different areas of our experience at work and in life that impact our well-being, financial well-being is still the least common in terms of strategy. And I would suggest until the last couple of years, it was one that was rarely mentioned or considered as part of a well-being strategy. But we also know that only 6% of employers have a policy to reduce in-work poverty, which is what we're seeing increasingly. So our strategies need to encompass lots of areas to give that comprehensive support in terms of well-being, but think about, given what are the significant stresses at the moment, how we can put a bit more attention to that area of financial well-being. Now, the Money and Pensions Advisory Service have developed a UK strategy for financial wellbeing. So they're an organisation, they're described as an arm's length body supported by the DWP, and their framework is around how to drive widespread change in terms of personal finance. So this isn't about organisations as such, but their framework and their model is something I think that can be really useful for us to think about when we are developing our strategies internally. And their framework and their work suggests that there are 4 elements that we want to support to help people manage their finances in the most effective way. The behavioural side, how people can manage their money, how they can plan ahead, and how they might proactively seek advice. The mindset element, that's how confident do they feel about managing money, how much control do they feel they have over their spending, how much they are geared towards saving and want to do that, and areas around, you know, how we think in relation to our money. And the actual abilities, sadly, we're not taught these really core skills through education, or certainly we weren't. Hopefully things are changing. You know, that actual basic money, budgeting, the financial numeracy, understanding different concepts, you know, what interest rate means, what an APR is, all those sorts of things, and also where to access advice so people can make those informed decisions. And that's kind of linked to the connections where people can get reputable financial guidance, you know, which organisations to go to, you know, avoiding that just Googling and ending up paying indirectly for other services that are not helpful. So it's quite a useful thing to think about when we are considering the elements we could put into a strategy. From the CIPD perspective, they consider there are 3 core elements to a policy. The first one is payment of at least a fair and livable wage. So I mentioned a moment ago that only 6% of employers actually have a policy to reduce that in-work poverty. So the payment of a fair and livable wage. Support for in-work progress, the career progression, the development, giving people access to increased income. And then the area of financial wellbeing, education and support, so people can make informed decisions. So the 3 areas. If we now think about the actual strategy, how can we go about developing that with our organisations? And as with everything, we need to ensure that there is the clear business case. Now, we need to engage with the key stakeholders, usually, you know, the senior leadership team. But to do that and to get that engagement, the likelihood is we need to have a robust business case. What information do we need to provide around that? So, you know, clarifying what is meant by financial well-being. Personally, I think it's quite a the phrase is almost misleading in terms of where people might think about, it's not as straightforward as, financial advice, managing money. It's that whole connection of all the things that influence our well-being and how they're linked to our finances. How the well-being strategy is part of your wider well-being strategy and links to other areas of strategy, the reward, recognition, pay scale, all those elements. How you can align the strategy to CSR, corporate social responsibilities, which are high on the agenda for a lot of organisations, and your values, your culture and values as an organisation. How does providing good well-being support in the financial area also align with that? Maybe we can collect some benchmarking data. What are competitors doing? What are other people in the area? And bearing in mind, we need to be part of the wider strategy. A lot of organisations, the employee proposition, the attraction and retention is an important area. 19% of people say they would leave for a better paid job. We need to make sure we've got some data. And perhaps that risk assessment as well. What's the cost of doing nothing? You're going to lose a portion of people because they can't afford to stay. What about the attendance side? The linked to stress, cost of getting to work, all those things that we need to think about. How can you put some quantifiable measures around it? Things like productivity. We've seen the data that if people are not feeling, are struggling and worrying about money, it affects how they perform at work. What's the impact on productivity? And also things like, it depends how you measure your productivity, levels of customer service, problem solving skills, error rates, accident rates. They're all things that are negatively impacted when people are not able to perform in their best way at work. Cost of mental illness, what are your top reasons for absence? Looking at those. And, general engagement, motivation linked intrinsically to productivity and other outputs. But where can you do that risk assessment to get that data that can help us put through with that business case? And then understand our own employees. How do we understand those that are struggling? Changes in any behaviour of particular people, changes in performance, the stigma associated with finding having difficulty with our finances, not being able to keep up, can make it very difficult for people to speak openly about it. So where can we pick up where people are struggling? And then what about the profile of the workforce? Remembering that all can experience financial worries. It's not just the low paid. But we do know that the risk will vary by sector, pay and hours. If people don't have regular contracted hours, 0 hours contracts, or just different hours, different weeks, can make things different. Geography, gender, ethnicity, disability, all the things that create are often that the factors that create inequality can be factors that will influence here. And then what data do we actually have? What other data? It can be difficult to collate because people are reluctant to discuss financial issues, but what might you be able to access? You may be able to do some form of anonymised survey to identify concerns so that you can tailor support specifically. There may be wider demographic data available or sector-specific research that's been published. Perhaps things like any requests for loans. You may have an EAP who provide reports that give you some idea of what people are contacting them for. You may have things like gender pay gap, equality pay audits, other data that you have that could again give you some idea. And then absence levels, because that obviously affects income and may indicate difficulty. Or possibly working with unions, they may have data and insights from communications with employees that can help you. So think about all of those things that might help you present a business case. Then think about, where are you now? What do you currently offer? I mean, some things people have been offering for a while, some more than others, but things like pre-retirement planning, discount schemes, debt support, EAPs, the employee assistance programs. Although a lot of employers have those, we know that the take-up is still stupidly low given the level of information and support available. I know a lot of them across the sector, I think it's 5% is considered a good uptake. And I think people often think an EAP is just about some free counselling if people need it, but they've usually got a huger range of support which can be related to finance, legal as well. So is there an EAP that you're using? How flexible is your current offer? The things that you offer in there in this area, can staff tailor it to their needs? Who might they be able to talk to? Where are they? Do they have support available, either internally and externally? And how can you identify any gaps in your current support? You know, possibly a survey. I mentioned focus groups you could do, but get that clarity on the situation now. And then what can you include? Remember the fact that no one size fits all offering is a key to a good strategy. So people can tailor it and adjust it according to their needs, you know, different stages of life, different demographics. Lots of things will influence the support that people need. And make sure the policy is clearly aligned with wider strategies around wellbeing as well as broader. The fair wage side, if you remember, that was one of the key elements from the CIPD perspective, looking at being an accredited living wage employer. And then some of the basics, like ensuring that you pay on time and accurately. You know, people wait for pay. They can't, bear with me. Apologies, I've got background noise that's probably being picked up. So in terms of fair wage, yeah, secure regular hours so people can budget and manage their money effectively. Look at all the policies surrounding pay and reward to make sure they're fair. And check any interventions don't disadvantage people that might be in receipt of benefits. Check pay slips are easy to understand. So people have got clear understanding of the money that they've got with a clear pay structure. An EAP, if you haven't had one before, it's worth looking into. The cost per head is not usually huge. It can be more expensive if people are not using it, but then that's part of thinking about how you roll it out. How you might signpost people to other sources of information, give them easy access and links to reputable sources of information. Look at your overall reward and benefits package. What would be useful for people? The season ticket loans, shopping discount vouchers, flexible working to reduce travel, help with childcare, all those things that can make a real difference to people. Look at the level of sick pay provided. What's available if there is crisis situation, if people need help because of unexpected costs. We talked about the proportion of people that have the ability, that have the savings for that. So what might you have available for that? Perhaps things like help with rent deposits. There was a headline on the news just today about the impact on people in the rental sector because of the shortage of properties and how prices have gone up. So, you know, finding a deposit can be hugely challenging. Look at your career progression. Say this is about so many different areas of our strategy. You know, how are you supporting people to progress so they have the access to increased salaries in due course? Pension, does your pension scheme enable people to save sufficiently for retirement? What about your flexible working options? How can that be beneficial for people? What about the information and training that you offer? You know, the short and long-term financial management and advice, modeling tools, sometimes just the real back to basic tools, helping people think about their money, and also a lot about an approach to money. When we think about the basics, helping people develop an awareness of, you know, how they spend, what's their when are they like to impulse buy, how might they save, what are the habits they can create around their finances. And then the area of the whole implementation, how can you make sure that there are clear channels to communicate it all? How can you encourage conversations? How can you make it part of regular conversations in a way that people feel comfortable and safe to share any concerns? Regular reminders about the benefits that are on offer. We tend not to notice things until we need them. So keep the visibility there, and working by sort of helping to normalise this information to reduce the stigma. And as you're implementing it, maybe you pilot certain things, you receive feedback, you might adjust it, you might measure the impact, but make sure that you're really looking at whether it's meeting the needs of your workforce. And that wider review and evaluation, what metrics, we link it back to the business case we presented at the beginning. You know, where was your baseline? Look at the feedback and link with wider strategies. You know, if we've understand from the evaluation, you know, what was still worrying employees, where have we helped them? What resources were beneficial? What else would they need? How we can train managers to provide support, not advice. Remember, with all of this, we have to be, I should have put a disclaimer right at the beginning, you know, none of this is about any of us providing any financial advice. People need to be accredited and registered with Financial Conduct Authority to be doing that, but which obviously it's nothing we're going to be going into that area of, but we may provide people with access to that. And then obviously constantly reviewing the fair wage and looking at expenses people incur around their work and keeping the conversation going. So that's kind of a whistle stop go through a whole range of areas around financial well-being, considering where that the whole interconnection, the fact it's far from simple, and thinking about what we might do as organisations. So what I'd like you to do now, we've got a few minutes, and I do hope you'll stay. I know Joe and I are used to a few people dropping out at this point, but I hope you will stay to take the opportunity to have a chat in your organisation, in your groups, as to what you are finding as the current challenges in your organisation and what you've been implementing or what you have noticed has made a difference. So I hope that will be okay with you. Right, who's doing breakout rooms, Joe? We didn't have that conversation. Have you got that?
Yeah, I'll do it, yeah.
And apologies for the background noise partway through that. Any particular points that were coming up that would be useful for other groups to know? What any interventions you've implemented that have been particularly helpful for people? Yeah. Oh, Helen?
Yeah, I was just sharing in our group how we've actually been quite responsive all along through the cost of living crisis. So at the beginning of the winter, we made a cost of living payment to all of our people, just to kind of help them in that first bit before the government intervened with the fuel payment on your bills. We've also brought forward our annual pay rise. I think it's normally done around June time, and they've actually done it in March, again, to sort of help people with the cost of living. And then when the fuel prices hiked up back in the autumn, before that, we were still at the COVID mileage rate. So we dropped it down during lockdown to the 25p a mile, but we actually put it back up again when the fuel crisis hit, because we realized that people just really weren't managing. So those are three kind of really big interventions that we made quite quickly, really.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
think one of the issues for a lot of organisations is actually having the ability to make the payments that they would like to, because they're working in challenging sectors, that that can add to the pressure from the organisation side. But brilliant, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, we've worked really hard because we employ IT people who are really, really scarce, so they really are very precious to us, both business wise and to the business generally. But this is a real issue for us, because although they're on really good, what you compare to be good salaries, they still are. We're starting to see the stresses and the struggles come through. But we're just trying to divert things like, whereas we'd support things like gym membership, we're trying to find a way to divert that into everyday cost of living. So where there's a voluntary amount of money they can take to do something nice themselves, just trying to find a way that where they don't get hit by tax, where they can actually draw down that money to feed their families. And I think I was saying to our group, trying to normalise using things like community cupboards and clothes cupboards, where rather than using them from an economic point of view, but to stop things going to landfill, so that people get more idea about the idea of swapping things and selling things, and actually, within the group themselves, that maybe there are things that they could trade with each other, because they might have children's clothes that they could pass on, or things like that. And just trying to look at things where I guess we can normalise helping others a bit more than it's not just a voucher for a IT shop where they can go and buy a nice new shiny thing, which is what they all want to do. That's what they come in and show, but actually want to try and push it down to everyday living.
No, that's really good. Thank you. Thank you. So as you can see, quite a lot of people did leave, which is always the case. But hopefully the group discussion gave you an opportunity for a bit of further food for thought. So I hope you found it useful. We'll send the slides, we'll send out afterwards, which will have my contact details if anybody wants to catch up on anything that we've talked about. And also quite a few, well, no, it's not just about for HR people, but a lot of the work I do is with HR people. And I know HR people are not so good at looking after their own wellbeing. So I do run self-care power hours to help people develop a wellbeing plan. And I do those as freebies. So the next one I've got is the 17th of April, but we will share those details as well if anybody would like to join me for that. But I think, well, pretty well for time there, Joe. So if I can hand it back to you just to close it down, that would be great.
Okay, thanks very much to everybody for attending, and thanks very much to Marion for all your effort and input into the session. I will send out some correspondence after the event to the people that have signed up, and I will put a post on LinkedIn, so if you'd like a copy of the recording and the slides, then please put a comment against the post. We're going to be sending out a quick survey after the event, so if you've got a chance, please fill this in to give some feedback on the event. The next event that we're running is actually on the 20th of April and is called Psychological Safety. A link to sign up to this will be included in the email. We've also got a guild networking group for HR professionals. We've got over 1,000 people in there now, and it's a bit similar to WhatsApp, where you can network and share ideas. A link to this again will be on the email. And finally, if anyone is recruiting, then we've also got accountancy recruit and FD recruit within the group. But other than that, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to Marion for all your efforts, and a massive thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thank you.